Hello, everyone, and welcome to Judicial Temperament Questions and Answers. Thank you for joining us. If you are not a speaker at this event, please keep your microphone muted and your camera turned off. Note that this webinar is being recorded. The recording will be released on our website within the week. If you are attending for CLE credit, please sign in via the link provided in the chat box. The CLE sign-ins will be open for 1 week following this event. Finally, we encourage you to use the chat function to submit questions at any time. I will now turn the meeting over to our Director of Judicial Education, Denise Neary.
Thank you so much, Natalie, for this and for everything you do to keep our programs going. This is Berkeley Judicial Institute's first event of this tumultuous new year, and I'm so grateful that all of you are here and spending some time with us. A quick advertisement, I encourage you to take a look at Berkeley Judicial Institute's website. There you'll find registrations for future programs, recordings of past programs, interesting things to read. Consider joining our mailing list. Consider following us on Twitter at Berkeley Judicial. And while this is the first program of the year, it's the fourth in our series on judicial temperament. And in each of the programs, the audience response was, I have more questions, I want more. Those 4 areas of questions fell into these categories. How do I recognize my temperamental traits as a judge? What's my temperamental envelope of opportunity for change, and how can I make the most of it? How can I use this knowledge to change the temperature of an interaction in court? And what techniques for regulating emotion do judicial colleagues find particularly effective? Apparently, temperament is a tricky issue. We have 2 stars to lead our conversation, but I can't emphasize enough how much we're counting on all of you to use the chat feature, as Natalie mentioned, to share your tips, to ask your questions, to promote and provide some suggestions. So who do we have with us to facilitate this judicial temperament conversation? Our 2 judicial temperament stars. Our moderator is Berkeley Judicial Institute's Executive Director, Judge Jeremy Fogel. Judge Fogel has served both on the state and federal courts in California and is director of the Federal Judicial Center, the education and research arm of the federal courts. Prof.Terry Maroney, who I think will
forgive me for saying his partner in crime. Terry, are you okay with that? So his partner in crime for this is a professor of medicine, health, and society, and her research focuses primarily on the role of emotion in the law. More about them and more about Berkeley Judicial Institute in our chat. But let's get to it. Judge Fogel, Professor Maroney, where do we start today?
Well, thank you, Denise. And Happy New Year, everyone. I hope everyone has stayed healthy and stayed safe, and we're very happy to have you with us. As Denise said, we have done 3 programs about judicial temperament, what it is and how it works, and how it affects the way judges do their work. And those programs have largely been conversations between Terry and me about definitional things. What are we talking about, and what are the dynamics of temperament? How is temperament different from demeanor, and so on. And at the end of each of the 3 sessions that we did, we had a lot of questions lingering from the people who were watching and listening. And so we decided that we would have this session be pretty much a straight conversation with you, Q&A, exploring some of the things that we put out there in the first 3 sessions. If you missed any or all of those sessions, they're all available on the website, as Denise said, and I hope you'll take a look at them. I will say, and I don't mean to embarrass her, but Terry has really pioneered the development of a theory of judicial temperament. And her article in the Boston College Law Review is one of the resources we have available. It really talks about, from a pretty serious academic perspective, what temperament is in general, and then how temperament manifests itself in judges. And there's a distinction between temperament, which is a set of traits and tendencies that each of us has, and demeanor, which is how we actually carry ourselves in the bench and in the work that we do. And the big question is, temperament, some parts of temperament really are not particularly mutable. It's just something we've got, kind of like hair color and eye color and things like that. But there are things we can do within what Denise described as the envelope of possibility, the ability to know who we are and use what we know about ourselves to direct our behavior and our emotions and our interactions with people in positive ways. So Terry, let me just invite you to make a few opening remarks, and then we're going to take on a question that came from one of our friends and colleagues, Judge Kevin Burke from Minneapolis. We'll get to that question in just a second, but go ahead, Terry.
Great. Well, thank you again for having me again for this part 4. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of y'all. And I think I'm going to beg off actually any further introduction, because I think we should just get straight into the questions. I really do urge people to go back and look at parts 1, 2, and 3. But if there are fundamental things about my arguments about temperament that would help answer the questions, we can always go back to some of those foundational things. The one thing I will say is that I've written a condensed, digested, 4 judges in particular version of the Boston College Law Review article to which Judge Fogel just referred. It will be coming out in the summer 2021 issue of Judicature. So keep your eyes open for that, because it really does boil everything down into a very digestible package.
So we have I'll see if I can paraphrase Judge Burke's question.
Mm-hmm.
And he's asking about kindness.
Right.
And, if you read Terry's article and if you followed our earlier conversations, kindness is a trait. It's a temperamental trait. And it's something that some people have more of than others in terms of their temperament, not in terms of their actions necessarily, but in terms of what their particular set of trait tendencies is. And I think what Judge Burke's question was really, so what does kindness have to do with our work as judges, and how do we draw upon the trait of kindness that all of us have to some degree, and there's large variability among people as well as among judges in particular in terms of the strength of that particular trait. So Terry?
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. So I loved getting this question. I think that kindness is a very underappreciated aspect of judicial temperament. But if you look at the ways in which, say, judicial selection or evaluation committees look to a judge's temperament, they often say things like compassion or understanding, without really any theory of like why those things are so fundamental to what we look for in a judge. And I think the psychology of temperament makes it very clear why that is so fundamental. So as Judge Fogel, as you just said, the essence of a temperamental trait is something that we are born with in greater or lesser degrees, and then that grows in different ways depending on our life experiences, right? So the way the temperament we're all born with as a child will not be the exact same thing when we're adults, because our life experiences draw some capacities out, shrink others, etc. But kindness, and you mentioned variability, is one of those temperamental traits. So what this means is that different people have, as a matter of sort of our constitutions, our constitutional makeup, different levels of innate tendencies towards pro-social feelings like sympathy, compassion, fellow feeling, agape, and act, and the propensity to act on those feelings through pro-social acts, such as acts of generosity or altruism or kindness. And as you said, everybody has at least some of those things, unless you're at the extreme low end, for example, with certain forms of psychopathy, right? It's also not great to be at the extreme high end, because then you can have like pathological altruism. And all of us have probably known somebody like that in our lives at some point, who is so in touch with other people's feelings and their suffering that they literally can't function, or in that they give so much of themselves that they literally can't take care of themselves. Those extremes are very rare, right? Neither of them is beneficial. Most of us are somewhere in the middle. So what does this have to do with judging? So second important thing about temperament is that the qualities that we bring to the table, or in y'all's case, to the bench interact with situations to generate behavior. So as a judge, if you are coming to the challenges of the bench very strong in innate kindness, that means that you will have a tendency to hear people's situations in a manner that is perhaps most open to their experiences, less hostile, more forgiving, more open, more understanding, more contextual, less likely to make blanket judgments of people being like good people or bad people, but just understanding people as people, the human drama as a human drama, for basically feeling that human beings are decent, worthwhile people for whose benefit it is worth spending one's time and energy. And then when it's possible, again, the moderate to high kindness judge will see available opportunities to take pro-social action, and she will take them more than the person who's lower in empathy. So that was a lot. Let me just unpack it real quick and then I'll toss it back to you. That doesn't mean that the high kindness judge is going to do kind things all the time, because you often can't as a judge, and it would often like violate other values like the rule of law, for example. But think, especially in the great majority of cases where there are multiple correct or defensible ways to go, a high kindness judge is likely to see more win-win opportunities, or see opportunities where small kindnesses would be compatible with the rule of law and could ease somebody's path at least a little bit. Or even if there is nothing to do but to speak in a respectful or kind way to the person who's kind of on the, again, in the short end of the stick, that's a kindness, right? So again, it's not that people should be nice, you know, especially as a woman. I'm not here telling people to go out and just act nice, especially because women judges can get quite pilloried for if they're seen as too nice. It's not nice. Kindness is again this baseline feeling that people are worthwhile, that humanity is worthwhile, that everybody has a story and their stories matter, and it's important to me to understand them. And if there's an opportunity consistent with my other values to help people, I will do that. Right? So back to you.
Okay. Well, I have several thoughts about this. It's a big one for me. Always has been. One is that if you look at judges over time, we go back to the earliest civilizations and the emergence of the idea of a judge or a wise elder, or somebody who was the point of reference for people in society. Kindness is one of the things that people look for in that person or those people. They want to be understood. They want people who are able to understand where they're coming from when they bring their disputes to this person for resolution. And so the sort of more linear version of law that has evolved really, particularly in, well, I'm most familiar with the common law culture, but the idea of things being kind of linear and you reason from if this, then that, and that kind of thing. That's not, if you go back anthropologically, that's not really the way judges are seen, have been seen. It's something that's more modern. It's more rationalistic. And so I think that's one point I'd like to make. And I think still at some level that when non-lawyers, when unsophisticated litigants come before the court, that's kind of what they're hoping they're going to get. They don't understand all of the legal mumbo jumbo. They're looking for the kindness and compassion and understanding. And I think that's even true in business cases. It's like people can get pretty sophisticated, but there's still that sense of wanting to be heard, wanting to be seen, wanting to be understood. So I think that's one point I'd make. Another is—
I can interject there, Judge. I mean, that's sort of the heart of procedural justice. So one way of thinking about kindness is the type of attitude towards parties in the public that make procedural justice values real, like just listening to people. That's a kindness. Showing a baseline of respect for people. That's a kindness. Letting people know concretely that you understand their interests. That's a kindness, right?
Right. It is. And I think really the point that I think really bears repeating is that that's actually what judging has looked like for most of history. That's really been kind of a core value of judging for most of history. And we've, in our particular variant of law, we've moved a little bit away from that. And you can even go to places in the world where there's more of that baked in. I mean, it's actually just baked into what happens even in courtrooms. So that's one point. Another is, I think, and this is really kind of builds on what I just said, I think because of that, I think people tend to self-select. So if you get sort of a high kindness person who has a very strong trait of kindness in their temperament, a lot of those people don't become lawyers. You know, they find other ways to work where they are able to be that person more. You know, they become social workers, they become people in helping professions, they become medical providers. I mean, they do things where they get to be with people in ways that allow that, where that kindness trait is valued. I mean, my wife is a parent educator and she taught preschool for many years, and the women she worked with at this school she taught at were just whenever I see them, they just blow me away because their kindness is so evolved and it's so deep, and so, you know, I think it's one of these things where we don't necessarily see that our profession kind of is skewed off to one side in this regard. I mean, it's not to say that there aren't judges who are deeply kind, because there are, but there is just this kind of self-selection. And then
yeah, and on that, you know, it's what would it look like if we took seriously the idea of judging as a helping profession? Because it is a helping profession. It's a very particular type of help, right? It's helping people to resolve disputes that they can't resolve themselves. But that's a very helpful thing to do in the world. And if one actually just thought of it as, I'm a helping professional, then that could actually have an impact on our profession.
Yeah. And I think that's not, it could, and it hasn't been the paradigm. I think we're moving, more in that direction, because I think people are increasingly realizing that it's, this stuff's important, and then it matters no matter what kind of judge you are. But I know when I went to law school, and I expect the same is true for you, Terry, I mean, this was just really seen as almost like an irrelevant thing, right? I mean, what does that have to do with you know, the legal principles we're trying to apply to the facts? And so I think,
yet, if you look at sort of tributes to great judges, like, you know, on the occasion of their retirement or their obituaries, or, you know, being lauded in some way, it's very typical to laud great judges for being kind.
Yes.
And, you know, Ed Devitt was, you know, famously said at one point that if we judges could have but one quality, it should be a kind and understanding heart. The bench is no place for cruel or callous men, no matter their intellectual power. So it's an odd thing where it clearly matters, and when we see it, we love it, but we're not deliberately cultivating it, nor are we selecting for it. So it's sort of like the kind judge is emerging despite our profession.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's not cultivated. It's a really important point. So you think about the way lawyers are trained. I mean, we're trying to do something about the way judges are trained, but you talk about the way that lawyers are trained, at least the way lawyers have been trained. And these skills you were describing earlier of really being able to listen and to see the other person's context and reality, and to have that ability to kind of regard somebody with kindness, that's not taught in law school. I mean, that's not a set of traits and skills that law schools are particularly focused upon. And that the last point I wanted to make was, you know, where this all really kind of hit me in the face was when I was a family law judge, and I did that for a number of years. And it really was, well, I mean, I don't know how you navigate that space without trying to be kind and without trying to understand what's going on with people. Because if you try to look at it rationally, oh my God, they're fighting over a refrigerator, you know, they're fighting over custody of a dog. You know, you kind of, if you define the problem that way, then you end up having having contempt really for the people who are appearing. And sort of a kind regard of those folks is, my God, they're so lost in their pain and their anger and their grief and all the things that surround the breakup of their primary relationship, that all these little things end up being important. You know, they're places where people take stands and end up, you know, trying to cope with what's going on with them, and just sort of seeing this as like, wow, you know, you just sort of need to try to be there. You need to listen, set limits when it's appropriate, but essentially really be that problem solver, that helper that you were describing. I think so. I just think kindness is an extraordinarily important trait for judges, and I think it's one that it can be cultivated. You know, it sort of goes to the second part of the you know, the envelope of possibility. Not everybody is born with that, but it's something that you can cultivate, I think, by practice. You know, we've talked, you and I, about things people can do to orient themselves so that when they come to work, you know, they're in a more positive place. I mean, practicing gratitude, practicing compassion. For some people, it's a matter of faith and living their faith. I mean, there are a lot of different ways to get there, but it's
perspective taking.
But it's recognizing that this is important. This is an important thing. This is not an add-on. It's not an afterthought. It's really it's a core competency. Yeah.
And could each of you take a moment to talk about how judges balance kindness, which they all aspire to, with time constraints, with the terribly busy? How do you do that? There's an easy question, right? How do you do that? But getting your arms around that battle of, I've got to do things faster, better, quicker. You know, I see more people coming into the court with, I want to treat each person with kindness. Some tips for balance? And again, helpful if people chat their good suggestions as well. So thanks.
I think I'll start on that. I think it's a really important question because there's ideals and there's reality. And again, this is why temperament is so important, because temperament tends to be what drives our behavior when we're under severe constraint, stress and time constraint. And those are two frequent companions of judging, depending on what kind of docket you've got. But most forms of judging involve significant stress and time constraint. And that's when, again, it's very helpful to have invested heavily in whatever temperamental kindness you have and try to pump it up to the limit of your envelope of possibility, because it will just come more naturally to you in moments of time constraint and stress. I think that, just as judges can rehearse certain things, like a plea allocution always follows more or less the same script, right? You can write yourself little kindness scripts and even have little checklists so you don't forget things. Like if you know that you have to be short with somebody, you can apologize in advance even. Or if you've got a massive room, a docket with several hundred people in there, and you don't want each of them to be individually crestfallen when they get 2 seconds in front of you, there's probably something you could say at the beginning to the entire group that would be an expression of kindness and apology for not being able to give them the kind of time you wish that they could get or that they deserve, but you will absolutely do what is required under the law, and you'll do it correctly, and you will make sure they're taken care of, or that kind of thing. What do you think, Judge?
Well, I was going to say, Terry, I mean, I gave a speech like that before every short cause calendar I ever did in family court, for exactly the reason that you said, that I knew that people were coming in there with things that were a big deal to them. And they were going to get maybe 5 minutes of my time, and there'd be 80 other people in the courtroom on a busy day. And there was no way I was going to be able to even begin to understand, why this was such a big deal. And so I always took time at the beginning and said pretty much what you just said. I mean, and said, it's going to be quick. I'm going to do the very best I can, but you need to know what the limits are now, and not expect it to be different. And if you don't like this, I mean, first of all, I'm sorry that it is this way, but secondly, there are other things you can do. I mean, you can try to mediate your case. You can seek the assistance of people who are here to help you do that. and work stuff out. If you want to litigate, this is kind of what litigation is going to be like most of the time. And then we would get into these short cause matters, and they really did have like 5 or 10 minutes each. And you inevitably on every calendar, there was somebody who just, they may have heard the speech or may not, but they couldn't hold it in. I mean, they just had too much they wanted to say. And I would have to limit them. And I tried very, very hard every day to just say, this is exactly what talked about before. And if I took an hour to listen to you, then all these other people wouldn't get their cases heard. And, but sort of always tried to maintain a tone of respect that I knew that they had a lot to say. I knew that they were feeling a lot of stuff. And, and it was just, the time constraints are what they are. And, rather than, I think what happens sometimes, and I'm not claiming I've never been there, where you just get irritated with people because, they don't appreciate the time constraints that you're dealing with,
right. And then each person
yeah.
feels like an obstacle to your goal, which is keep it moving, right?
Calendar done,
it's a
right?
human thing, but the second you notice yourself thinking like that, that's a moment to be like, no, right? That's not my attitude today.
You can reframe it, and the lack of time, it is a problem, but you can focus on the way that's impacting the users, the litigants, rather than the way it's impacting you. I mean, there's a time and place to focus on the way it's impacting you, but probably not in the courtroom.
Right. And just letting people, if you do have the luxury of time, letting people ramble forever is not necessarily a kindness either, right? Because people need to be directed and shaped and help to know where they are and what the point of this proceeding is and what the point of, say, talking to a therapist is as opposed to talking to you, right? But kindness again doesn't mean sort of just like, all things, everything just kind of flowing however it flows. It's always keeping in mind what the objectives and the constraints are of the forum. But it's very, very, very small things. And I see Judge Burke, I see your comment here about Tom Brady and the drill, which is brilliant. Very small things are kindnesses. Eye contact is a kindness. Speaking to somebody in a respectful tone and noticing that they don't understand you and trying to rephrase something quickly and asking if they understand and taking their answer seriously. That's a kindness. These things can be very, very quick. But I would imagine, especially if you're in a short order kind of situation like you're describing, Judge Fogel, if you saw a video of yourself in your courtroom, you might actually be shocked at how little actual eye contact you give to each litigant or each attorney. You may think you're doing it, but you're probably not, right? Because again, you've got kind of another agenda. But for each individual person who doesn't get an eye contact and a statement that feels like it actually is meant for their ears specifically, feels that, right? So there are very small things that every judge can do every day as a matter of practice, right? It's not magic, it's just practice that can reflect kindness.
No, that's a really, really great point. And, the baby judge program for California judges that I went to, it's been 40 years ago. I can't believe it. But we had a video of doing criminal arraignments, and it was exactly for that reason.
Oh, wow.
And you could sort of see people, what's more routine than criminal arraignments, right? And, people weren't looking at even in a mock setting, they weren't looking at the defendants. They weren't making eye contact. They were fiddling with their pencils. They were doing this, they were doing that. And it was shocking to people to see what they actually looked like. So your point is absolutely spot on there. And we did it at the FJC with judges for doing civil case management in federal court 4 or 5 years ago. And we did the same thing. We actually had them videotaped, and we got a couple people who agreed that their performance, quote unquote, could be critiqued. And the people who volunteered were both incredibly kind and compassionate people. I mean, both of them, but I'm not going to name them. And they did the same stuff. I mean, they were looking over here, and they were fiddling with this or that, or they ignored something that was said, because, it's kind of, you develop these habits of being busy and just trying to get your work done, which is a real thing. And I've seen a lot of comments in the chat about that. And yet, you have to find a way, I think, to be quick and be efficient, and also find a way to make human contact with each person. I mean, I think it's aspirational, but I think it's a good aspiration.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pop in. I'm going to pop in for a second to mention what's in the chat.
Yes, please.
The much quoted Judge Burke has this as an inspirational thought. If Tom Brady can effectively run a 2-minute drill in a championship football game, judges can learn to make decisions that are quick, but display an interest in litigants being heard by someone who cares. That's a few words to say.
Other than the choice of quarterbacks, I think he's right on.
Does he play football? I wasn't aware. So, but more to what two questions that I think would be helpful to apparently kindness, like judicial temperament, is complicated. One of our listeners asks, how can appellate judges who are sitting with other judges and justices, how can they demonstrate kindness as one of many? And then another helpful thing is talking about computers. I think one of how do you avoid looking at them when you're losing focus, when you're getting bored? I think related to that is, how do you key up to people coming before court that sometimes you're looking at your computer because you're doing work, not because you're avoiding work. So the first is the appellate question, and the second is the computer question.
Let me start with the appellate question. And I also just wanted to say, as a matter of practice, Judge Fogel sort of mentioned being able to have some rituals or even a mantra that you can give to yourself to help cultivate these skills. And I talked to a judge once who said that every day before he would go out on the bench, he would say, "Today, let me be kind." He would literally just say that to himself. And he felt that there was as a religious person, he was really supposed to love everybody who appeared in front of him, but he said, love is a little bit too much for me, but kindness I can do. So every day before I go out on the bench, I say, today, let me be kind. So I just wanted to put that out there. Self-talk is important. So appellate judges are also super neglected in the field of temperament. A lot of people think that temperament is really more important for your trial judges. And I vehemently disagree. I just think it's different, right? But the temperamental challenges that can face an appellate judge are just different in form because they're not in the constant contact that typifies the kind of examples we've been talking about here. But they are in constant contact with each other and with their clerks, and they are in intermittent contact with the public, specifically attorneys, right? So every single one of those interactions is another place where kindness is very crucial. And again, kindness can completely coexist with discipline and rigor and scheduling and constraints and all those things. But the amount of intra-bench conflict on an appellate court that could be avoided if judges cultivated kindness towards each other cannot be overstated, in my view. Judge Fogel, I see you wanting to weigh in on that.
Well, it's only because I've been doing a project for, as you know, Terry, for the last couple of years with appellate judges, and have been conducting in-depth conversations with appellate judges. And we don't actually, we're not talking about collegiality, we're talking about diversity, but it's interesting because what you say is so right, that a good court or a collegial court or a non-collegial court can make all the difference in the world in terms of how an appellate judge feels about her job. And there have been stories, I mean, in California, none that are contemporary in my knowledge anyway, that where in some of the parts of the state, there were 3 or 4 judges in a division, and they had bad interactions, and people didn't speak to each other and stuff. And that was just so miserable for those.
It's poisonous. It makes it a really difficult work environment.
And then there's others, there's other courts where there's a culture of collegiality, and people really do talk to each other. And if they have a problem, they come to each other and talk about it. And those people love their work, so it really has a big impact on how people feel professionally. And it's not, there's a court that I working with some of the judges on recently where there was an en banc decision where the majority and the minority really got into it with each other, and I mean they've got a lot of unpacking to do, to kind of get over that and get past that, because it's not personal. People are trying to do a job, and it's a job that people can see differently and they can have different points of view.
Yeah.
But the importance of kindness among colleagues on an appellate court is really important. I mean, really can't be overstated. And I think I've even seen it in the way clerks are treated. I mean, there was a big scandal about that in the federal courts not too long ago. And the what happens at oral argument? The courts have oral argument. There are judges who kind of enjoy, toying with attorneys and making them kind of like doing the old Professor Kingsfield thing, not that argument is just playing with people until they break down. And I think it's another place where kindness is really important. And
absolutely.
So I think it's quite relevant to what appellate judges and justices do.
Yeah, I agree. And on the oral argument tip, I also talked to a lot of appellate judges, and I was an appellate clerk, and it's very easy to fall when you're in an appellate setting and you're cloistered for most of the time, and then you're kind of let out of the box, and like you get to be in public and you get to say stuff. It's can become very easy for it to be sort of again a playtime for the judges and the clerks looking on gleefully, because you've been just kind of cooped up and you've been waiting for this moment. But for the attorneys who are arguing, it's quite a big deal, and most of them are nervous, and again, there's an empathy that one can have there that can kind of help remind, and I think for clerks, everything feels like just kind of, if the clerk is not trained to think of this as way more important for the litigants than it is for you, right? Again, it's easy for it to feel like a bit of a game. Yeah. And that empathy can be in short supply.
There was another topic you wanted us to talk about, Denise.
So I had asked that you talk a little bit about use of computers.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we already got one helpful comment that one judge who's watching really just says, I need to check my calculator to check on mortgage issues, on custody issues, I do that, but little more about both, yeah. I think the use of computers and then the crutch of computers. Yeah. I'm a little bored, so I'll check my computer. I'm a little bored, so I'll check my phone. Those two
right.
things.
So let me take a swing at this through an emotion regulation perspective. So those of you who have been present for the other webinars know that one aspect of temperament is your emotional wheelhouse, like the high kindness, for example, being one example, or high anger being another. And the other half of every human being's temperament, including judges, is your relative skill with situation responsive emotion regulation. And in terms of the area where all of us can really look to grow, it tends to be more in the emotion regulation area. That's the and these things are sort of synchronistic in the sense that if you really, really aggressively cultivate your emotion regulation skills, it actually can move the needle a little bit on your emotional tendencies through practice. So that's kind of the intro. So one way to regulate one's emotions is through situation modification, which is just literally changing something about the environment so as to help you have the engagement with the situation that you want to have. So one thing I'm seeing in the chat is literally just don't have your computer on if you know that you're tempted to look at it, or put something on top of it. Sometimes I literally just take a piece of paper and I lay it on the screen, or I tape it on a screen if I want to just discipline myself not to look at it unless it's really important. So that, turn off your devices if you know that you want to be shielded from them, or give it to a deputy and say, like, be on the lookout for this one thing, and if it happens, interrupt me, and that way you're not looking for the interruption. Just like very simple things, if you know yourself and you know what's going to drag you off your game, just change the actual exposure to those things. I also love the idea of like, if you know that you have to look at something and somebody may interpret it as you checking out or disrespecting, just tell them and say, I need to look at this so I can do this for you, or whatever it is. Judge Fogel, I'm sure you have a lot of.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been there, and I am sorry to say that sometimes I've done that, that there's some pretty good academic research that just having a device available makes you less attentive. Whether you look at it or not, just the fact that it's there, you're thinking about it. So, and I think that's true. And I think there's also some pretty good data that people who think that they can do fine by multitasking. Oh yeah, I can listen to the testimony and I also can, look at whatever else I have to do. That's not true either. I mean that you have a finite amount of attention and it gets divided. I found, in certain kinds of trials I did, I say it involved an accounting or something like that, or maybe it was technical testimony in a patent case where I already had heard the technical testimony was really for benefit of the jury. That there was a tremendous temptation to tune out and work on something else or think about something else. I was very fortunate. We had real-time reporting in our court. So if something happened and there was an objection, I could say, well, hold on just a second. Could read the real-time transcript and I could rule on the objection. But, I never felt good about that when I was doing it. And I just got to admit, as much as I'm kind of all in with this, that I think, it's just one of these things that can get really hard. Particularly if you get the subject matter, if it's a boring trial, if it's a case that's not tried well, if it's a sit through, which I think most trial judges will recognize having had one or two of those, that being able to really kind of keep your attention in the moment, very, very challenging.
Yeah. And everybody's going to slip sometimes. I mean, I think you wouldn't be human if you didn't kind of start thinking about what you're going to cook for dinner sometimes, or start astral projecting. I think again, from an emotion regulation perspective, it's really about being aware that you're doing that and choosing when you think you can, for lack of a better term, get away with it. And not have it be something you just kind of slip in and out of mindlessly.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's an intentional choice as opposed to a bad habit.
That's right.
And I think
and there are things that you can do if you notice yourself doing it and you're like, Maroney, stop it. One judge told me that her trick is actually to lift her feet off the floor, which may, again, sound like a very silly thing, but she said, I have found that it is literally impossible for me to space out if I have to hold my feet up off the floor. And so if she felt herself drifting off into thinking about tonight's lasagna, she would just lift her feet and it would kind of click her back into place. So everybody's going to have a different thing. But again, I think it's about making choices, noticing, having a way to call yourself back, self-talk to remind you why it's important. Learned Hand has this marvelous quote about like what it was like to sit through some trials, and feel himself being worn down to a nub, and just the incessant boredom and the need to look interested when he wasn't. Like, if Learned Hand can feel like that, so can you, right?
I mean, and we all do it. I mean, I don't know everybody who's listening to us, but I mean, I don't know too many judges who haven't done that, right? I mean, it's like if we're kind of giving advice and saying, okay, well, it's better not to do that. I mean, I think it's really more, to just not just do it mindlessly, not do it reflexively, not become that person kind of, in all the time, because, and I think I've seen that happen to judges too, where they're just not. And the great example, it was all over the international news, was the trial of the mass murderer in Norway. Who one of the judges who was trying the case was playing solitaire during the testimony, and he got caught doing it. And Yeah, well, I mean, that trial, I mean, to be fair, I mean, there were, everybody kind of knew what had happened and all that, but I mean, the message that it sent was just so bad,
So bad.
and
And
so
yeah, you can
yeah,
get it, especially, the way that that Norwegian and Scandinavian legal systems work. A lot of it is like there's a certain script you have to go through no
yeah,
matter what, right? There's no plea bargaining, there's everything's very sort of regimented. So you can imagine that's a perfect setup for being like, my job is to sit here, but there's not really anything for me to do.
right,
And maybe this is my background as having once been an actor, but I think at that moment you can think like, actually, I do have a job right now. My job is actually to perform attention.
yeah,
That's my job right now.
yeah,
And maybe I'd rather be doing something else for my job right now, but that actually is my job right now, is perform attention. And that's okay, right? Because that's still, again, doing something that the people in front of you need.
I think computers have enabled so many good things. I mean, they've enabled a lot of connection. They've made life a lot more efficient. You can gather data and make and analyze data so much more quickly and exponentially quicker. I do think that we should not ignore the fact that they've also cost us things.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that um, I mean, I don't want to get too deep into this, and I know we wanted to talk a little bit about um, COVID and the times we're living in, but the I used to, when I was practicing law way back when, I mean, the way we did discovery is that the lawyers would meet and you would hand each other papers, and you would talk about them and you would talk about other stuff and you would, see if you could work the case out. But there was a human element to it, and you didn't have hundreds of thousands of documents per side. I mean, you had the documents that were relevant, and you talked about those, and I think that wasn't always great either. I mean, sometimes stuff got missed, and sometimes good lawyers took advantage of bad lawyers. But there was a humanity to it, at least in my memory, that our modern hyper technological litigation doesn't help us maintain.
Yeah, it doesn't naturally feed
Yeah,
that
yeah,
human connection, right? You have to work
right,
for it.
right,
Yeah, which kind of brings us to the COVID question.
yeah, yeah. So Denise asked us to said that we'd gotten a fair number of pre-questions about the pandemic and its effect on this whole topic that we've been talking about for the last several months. Uh, and I have a lot of thoughts about it, but Terry, what do you think? I mean, you've been studying judicial temperament and judicial regulation of emotion and so on. What has this last year done? How has it overlaid on those topics?
Well, I think that y'all are in clearly a superior position than I to know what it's like for you, but I can tell you what I've seen. So a number of judges have told me that, actually, I just had a judge tell me the other day that even though she was an incredibly experienced trial judge, decades and decades on the bench, sort of prides herself on being a master of running a courtroom. When she had to switch to running a civil jury trial completely on Zoom, she felt as naked and nervous and ill-prepared and out of her depth as she did the first day of the job. And that's a startling thing to feel if you think you're pretty good at what you do. I've experienced it as a professor. You just can't do things the same way anymore. And so there's a helpful thing to that, which is, boy, do you really notice your habits when your habits are yanked away from you, right? So from the temperament and emotion regulation perspective, if you have found the shift this year extremely startling, and if it's kind of upended the way that you do things, that is one, normal, and two, an opportunity to see places where maybe you've gotten complacent or even lazy. We all do, right? And it's also a chance to notice what it is you miss. So Judge Fogel, you were just talking about, like, you kind of miss the good old days of discovery where there's like, here's my pile of paper, here's my pile of paper. Do you miss the human connection? Do you miss how much easier it is to read people's facial expressions and tones of their voice and bodily movements when you're actually seeing them in person? Do you miss the ease of connecting with people that comes with in person as opposed to on a screen, well, then that shows that that was important to you, right? Which is an important thing to notice. That means, when you go back to things being kind of the way they were, or at least a little bit, you'll be grateful for those things and maybe again be able to reframe them not as sort of like the messy human stuff that gets in the way of doing one's job, but as like part of the ineffable essence that makes that job worth doing. So I think the harder nut to crack is how do you cultivate that kind of human connection in the way that we're doing it here, right? Through the screen. I think again, like I'm now very aggressively looking into my camera, which is hard for me to do because there's a chat over there and Judge Fogel, you're there, but I think training yourself to actually try to have eye contact, which is completely bizarre because if I'm having eye contact with you, I'm by definition not looking at your face, right? So doing those things, making more of a performance of listening, because the default online is to look like you're looking somewhere else or doing something else. I don't know, that's what I've got for now. Judge Fogel, I'm very curious.
Yeah, well, so it's really interesting. It's multi-layered. So I want to start with some things that actually are counterintuitive. I think virtual has actually made certain things better and easier than they were. And I think there's some learning in there. One family law judge told me that when she needs to talk to children in custody cases, that it's way easier to talk to them using Zoom when the kid's in their bedroom.
Yeah.
If the kid has to come all the way down to the courthouse and go into
a very intimidating environment.
And that the quality of those conversations actually is a lot better. So that's just a data point. Access.
I mean, that comes up with criminal defendants too.
Right.
Not that most of them are in a very comfortable place, especially if they're detained. But the not having to physically move human bodies in and out, which has a certain dehumanizing quality, especially if people have to get suited up and shackled, and it's just like that whole rigmarole of the movement of human bodies is not always a helpful thing.
No, I mean, in fact, I've actually recommended, and it was some congressional testimony I did several months ago. I said, that for non-dispositive criminal proceedings, that they ought to change to Rule 53 so that those could be done virtually and you could have cameras, because it is just like you said, if somebody comes in and they're sitting in the holding cell for 3 hours and then they have 2 minutes while their case is continued or something, and that can be worked with. I mean, that can be better. And then there are a lot of quote unquote small proceedings, things like debt collection matters, evictions, probation violations, things like that, where the transaction cost for the party of taking a day off of work, going downtown, parking, going into the courthouse, is greater than the risk they're taking if they don't show up. Right. And so the data from states that have aggressively used virtual for these kinds of proceedings is that more people are showing up. So that at least they're getting a chance to be in court, and as court exists now. And I think also, the point you raised about the quality of the contact, the eye contact, the physical contact, I think that is, you're never going to replicate having somebody in the room, but you can certainly make it work. You can learn to look at the camera. You can learn to make sure that you're emotionally present, just like you would be if it was a in-court proceeding. You convey a focus and an attention to what's going on. And one thing that has been a really interesting personal data point for me is that this diversity study I've been doing with federal circuit judges, we've done all the interviews on Zoom.
Yep. I've been doing interviews on Zoom too. And you can get pretty deep.
They've been just fine. People have been very candid. They've been very disclosing. We've just learned a ton from them. And I wondered, what would have happened if we had gone to the chambers, never mind the travel costs and all that, but what if we had gone to the judges' chambers and been sitting there talking about the same subject? I'm not sure it would have been as easy.
It might have felt more formal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so I just think those
And
are
it kind of gives and it takes, but I think, you know, it's a disruption, and a disruption is the gift of us having to think, okay,
yeah,
what is this good for? And what is this not good for? And some things will survive. We'll keep doing some things like
yes.
you're
No,
saying
I think you're right.
about Rule 53. I mean, we will make some changes. And if that means that you as a judge are spending more time seated in front of a screen, that can do a lot of good things, but also I'm immediately now worried about wellness. I'm saying, okay, you guys need to get up and you need to do some jumping jacks, or you need to like really decorate your spaces, or you need to do things, you know, to be able to
Well,
feel okay about this new normal.
yeah, and wellness is where I was going to go next, because
Yeah.
I think you know, pretty hard to have a good judicial demeanor and make the best of your temperament if you're not well. You know,
Yeah.
if you're chronically stressed, if you're anxious, if you're depressed, if you're lonely, and you know, all of these are things that judges are dealing with now in the
Yeah.
pandemic.
Yeah, and judges are, you know, some judges, again, this is a complete matter of personality and temperament. Some judges, truthfully, are tickled to be, you know, not by the situation, which is horrible, but like, oh gosh, I honestly, I get to sit at home and do all my work without having to interact with all these people, you know, or I can really focus, or, you know, some people really relish the isolation, and in fact, it's good for them. And some people just absolutely hate it. I mean, some trial judges are like, my entire juice in life is basically running around and popping in and out of the courtroom and having these people and those people, and this thing happens, and I don't have that anymore. I don't know how to live, right? So I think it's again, it's very individual, like what about this situation works for you and what doesn't. And are there any aspects that you can change
Yeah,
consistent with your job to be a
that
little
last
bit
thing you
better
said.
lined up with your
Yeah,
personality?
that last thing you said is I'm hearing that from lots of judges and lots of lawyers. They miss the human contact. They,
Yeah.
you know, even if it's 2 seconds, just waving at somebody in the parking lot, you know, that there's just their life kind of includes those kinds of human interactions, and
Mhm.
not having them is a real loss.
Yeah.
So I think that's for real. And I think it affects different people differently, as you said. I mean, for some people, it's not that big a deal, but I mean, for some people, it's a huge loss.
Huge, right?
And,
So again, it's about no, like where are you on that continuum, and
yeah,
are there small or large ways that you can alter your situation to make it a little bit easier? I mean, a lot of judges are physically going into chambers even though there's no one there, just because it helps with the boundary between work, not work. You know, some people are like, if I don't have to drive downtown and go into my chambers, why would I do that? I've invested in my wonderful home office, right? So just the, you know, everybody's going to make their own peace with this as best they can.
well, and this is where, I mean, in the wellness vein, it's not enough. I mean, I think it's necessary, but not sufficient. I mean, it's necessary to realize, gee, I'm feeling depressed, you know, or I'm feeling
Yes.
anxious, or I'm feeling lonely. I think recognizing those feelings for what they are is
Yeah.
critically important.
Yeah,
But
or grieving the fact that I don't have people to wave at in the parking lot
yeah, I
anymore,
mean,
and I
it's
miss
very,
them. I can't wait to wave at them again, and I'm going to appreciate it when I
yeah,
do. I don't
and
even
there's
like
things,
them.
yeah, and there's things you
Yeah,
can do now to at least mitigate that. You can't recreate those experiences, but there's things you can do to mitigate them. And
yeah,
you know, and I think this is this whole vein. And boy, you know, the people who teach this kind of stuff, wellness and self care. I mean, they're having a boom right now that they've never expected. You know, where people, you know, they need something. I mean, how am I going to get through the day? I mean, I have described the last year, and I'm sure I have millions of people as company. The last year just had this kind of apocalyptic feeling to it. You know, it was, we had COVID, we had, you know, incredibly divisive and difficult political circumstances. I mean, you know, we had climate disasters, we had all kinds of things going on. We had
we had the
Black
murder of
Lives
a
Matter.
federal judge's
We had the murder.
family.
Yeah, we had the, you know, we had the murder of George Floyd. We had all these things going on, and it so it really did feel apocalyptic. And somewhere in the course of the year, I realized I've always liked choral music, and I started playing stuff that was written by people back in the the period of Henry VIII and period of the Black Plague, Palestrina and Tallis and people like that. And it's just gorgeous music. I mean, it's just this really uplifting, wonderful music. And I kept telling myself, they wrote this, in these incredibly dark and unhappy times. They were able to evoke the full glory of the human spirit, in these very, very dark times. And that, just doing that as a ritual has made such a difference to me. And I realized the other day I must be getting more hopeful, because I don't need to play those guys anymore. I can actually play the music I play in the mornings a little bit lighter than it was a couple months ago. So it's like, but it's interesting that we feel these things, and sometimes we can be paralyzed by them. And I think this whole idea of being aware of who you are and doing what you can within your envelope of possibility, it really applies to the wellness piece as well.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to pop in with a few comments from the chat. One saying we get so much more compliance with referrals to family court for sessions with child custody counseling than when people had to come to courts and come in. Unsure how CCRC feels in doing them remotely because of what others have mentioned about reading cues and clues from personal appearance. And then related to that, sometimes cues are missing when connected via Zoom or the like. There's a flatness to the interaction, as you both discussed. But are there ways to address this to make a better emotional or human connection, meaning more that like live? I think not only did Terry talk about some of those, I think she demonstrated some of them. I was a little intimidated when her eyes came completely to the front of the screen. So those two comments sort of reinforcing what you said. And then we were closed for 2.5 months, but we've been live since June 2020. So we have social interactions, but along with that comes the stressor of masks, social distancing, and fear. And so with those 3 comments, I'm going to add an unsolicited one of my own. One of the things when the judges talking about choral music, one of the things that I've been lucky enough to do during the pandemic, and I'm acutely aware that we all have our own pandemics, right? They're very different experiences person to person. Berkeley Greater Good Center has a free is very important to me in my pandemic pursuits, free online course about the science of happiness. And so every day I'm tasked, how difficult is this, with thinking about the things that make me happy. Writing them down. It can sound a little bit adorable, but I find it really helpful. So I'm still having to write those down, Judge Fogel. So I'm not as far advanced as you are, where you don't need the choral music anymore. Well, I still need to write down.
Didn't just happen. I mean, it was a practice I developed over years of trying to figure out what worked for me. But Denise is talking about our partner, another one of our partners in crime, the Greater Good Science Center, and we are linked with them. We partner with them on a lot of programs on judicial health and wellness. And yeah, I mean that their whole point is, and they do a wonderful job at it, is what are some practical things you can do to navigate these really difficult times? And it's a tremendous resource. So, but these are great questions. So Terry, you wanna go after them?
Yeah, again, I wish I knew. I can, definitive answers to these. I guess the one definitive answer to the what can we do about the flatness is notice and try. So, and some things will fall flat. Again, it's very individual to you. Like you can even, okay, so you guys are looking at my home office, right? And everything I do in my life right now, I do from here. I teach from here. I do webinars from here. I do everything from here. Because this is reflective of my personality, I have made it very colorful. I've got plants. I've got silly things and serious things up. But for myself and for my students, I try to cultivate sort of a vibrant, warm atmosphere. So maybe do that. That may not be you. Maybe you're more of a sort of solemn, dignified sort of atmosphere person, but build an environment that reflects that with you. That's something personal. That's something people wouldn't see necessarily in a usual courtroom. I also think of having to exaggerate a little bit, which again, this can go a little bit flat, but it is 100% true that things can get emotionally flattened out on Zoom. And also, if you're in person wearing a mask, people are doing these really cool studies right now about how much of emotional content is blocked physically by the mask. Like how much work is the eye area doing relative to the rest of the face? And the bad news is, as you can imagine, more than half is being done below the mask. So you may actually have to just like practice doing different things with your eyes. Like you may think that you look like pleasant and surprised, but you may have to be like, you may have to do some things that feel a little silly, perhaps. And I think there's really no substitute with just saying things out loud. Like, I'm sorry if this feels a little impersonal. I'm going to do my best to counteract that, but it kind of is that way. And I'm sorry for that. I'm sure you are too, but let's do our best, just anything to even acknowledge the weirdness of the scenario, or making fun of the fact that you have to wear this mask or whatever it is. Anything to inject a little humanity into it will help.
And again, it's that self-awareness. So you're in a situation that is flat. So what do I have? What is my envelope of possibility with that situation? What can I do about that? I have one of the side roles I have is I'm an ombudsperson for a court. If there are complaints against judges, I try to intercede and resolve them. And it's actually really hard to do that, over Zoom, right? Because it's very, it's imagine. If you got a complaint like that, or so what's been helpful in the situations I've had is really been to say, look, this is weird right now. It'd be much better if we were talking about this in person. And so I just want you to know that I know that, and let's just try to be as transparent as we can. And just even saying that, really has made a difference. It's like it's a fellow feeling kind of thing. Mm-hmm. that you're not ignoring the situation. You're not just trying to work around it, but you're acknowledging the limitations of it. Masks are very challenging. I always think about my daughter, who's very intense, and she when she has her mask on, and she's pretty religious about wearing it when she goes out. I can tell in her eyes what's going on with her, but that's her. People are different, and I think it's also sort of knowing the people that you're dealing with.
Yeah. Yep. And when all else fails, just think this too shall pass, because it's true.
Yeah. We're getting there. I think 6 months from now, maybe we'll be able to have a very different conversation about this. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Denise, what else we got?
So we had talked, I think we covered everything except if you were starting over, brand new judge. I think that as an overstatement, judges worry about making sure they broadcast, they know what they're doing. What should judges be thinking about if they're brand new? How, if you had a magic wand, Professor Maroney, Judge Fogel, how would that magic wand be used to change what judges think about as most important day one?
Gosh.
That's a great question.
We're going to have a fifth program. Come on.
Yeah.
I think it's such an important question that I'm actually sitting here just thinking about what to say in response to that. I do think that to me, it always goes back to self-awareness. And I think a great many unfortunate interactions can take place when we feel the need to sort of puff ourselves up in our own eyes or in the eyes of others. If you're a new judge, you're a new judge. You're on a learning curve. That's okay, right? And that may sound like a sort of an asinine thing to say in a way, because you do want to like make sure you're not making terrible mistakes from the beginning. But one, everybody does. I have actually never met a judge who didn't make a good number of mistakes at the beginning, you know, usually not catastrophic, right? There's always the power of taking a break to find something out, admitting that you don't know something, having things take longer than you think they should take because you need to get up to speed, and apologizing if you have to the people who, you know, might wish that you were 20 years on the bench instead of 20 minutes on the bench. But I think that, again, it's sort of a self-talk thing. Like, you know, this is what it feels like to be starting out, and that's okay. And I will learn and I will get to where I want to be. But in the meantime, I'm gonna do the best I can. I'm gonna do the best I can. And the fact that I'm learning is not somebody else's problem, right? So I'm not gonna dress anybody down or puff myself up or talk down to somebody in an effort to make me feel more competent right now. It's not their fault that I have a learning curve.
Yeah. Well, and I just want to say, you know, when, you know, Terry and I have now had the pleasure of working together for going on 8 years. And when we started working together, it was to design a program for judges on emotion regulation and emotional intelligence, which we've done at Vanderbilt now 5 times. And the program is for mid-career federal judges, right? So you have to have been a federal judge for 5 years before you come. So these are all like really accomplished people, right? And we do this program, and it's very much centered around the stuff we're talking about now. And just about all the people who come say, this is the first time in my entire professional career that I've ever gone to something that's focused on this. And I think in some ways, that's just totally wrong. I mean, I said earlier that, you know, if you go the paradigm of judges, we actually talk about paradigms in our opening session in that program, that judges historically and cross-culturally have always been expected to have a certain kind of emotional core and kindness and compassion. But the way we teach lawyers and the way we teach judges, that's just not part of the curriculum. It's an afterthought. It's a great thing if judges have it, but it's not something that's kind of seen as a core competency. And it's certainly not taught in baby judges school. I mean, in baby judges school, right, you're learning how to, you know, get the work done that you got to get done. And so that leaves people vulnerable to the exact problem that Terry was just talking about, and that the question presumes, which is that, you know, you're new, you know, you're expected to kind of get in the water and swim, and so you think you got to act like you know what you're doing even when you don't. And so the transparency, being able to say, look, you know, I'm going to do the best I can, but this is the first time I've ever tried a criminal case. I just want you to know that, you know, that's actually not a bad thing. You know, it's like kind of developing that kind of humility, that kind of emotional awareness. And I think it ought to be happening way before somebody's, you know, 5th to 10th year of being a United States District Judge. And so I think, but I mean, that's, you know, it's very aspirational. It's very idealistic on my part. I'm just glad that we're able to do it even for the people we do it for. But it does really indicate something to me about our systemic values and how we might want to think about them going forward.
Yeah, and you know,
and I'm sorry, Terry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's something anomalous about our system too. Like in most developed Western countries, judging is a profession for which you study, and you know, we're one of the only places where you're a lawyer and then suddenly kaboom, you're a judge, and you have these ideas about how you think you're supposed to be, or you're like, you've got a tally of all the judges that you ever appeared in front of that you thought were great, and you're like, I want to be like them, but you don't know what goes under the hood with them either, right? Like they had their learning curve and now you're having yours. So it's an odd thing to expect of a person. And you know, the new judges I talk to, and I've talked to quite a lot of them, there's a real emotional roller coaster at the beginning. Like there's elation and there's despair and there's sudden isolation and new camaraderies. And there's like the, you know, things that you thought you would love, you turn out hating. The things you thought you'd hate, you turn out to love. You feel you're a perfectionist, so you hate making a mistake. You hate having to apologize, you know. And I think if you can take, again, that same, cycling this back to kindness, what would it look like if you looked at yourself every day and said, today I will be kind to myself, right? I will be kind to those who appear in front of me. I will be kind to my staff, to my clerks, and I will be kind to myself. And then in 20, 30 years, you're the person that people are like, I want to be like her, right? But you can't rush experience. It cannot be rushed. You just have to have it.
Well, and one of our chatters says, be honest. I told attorneys and litigants initially when I started in family law from a 17-year criminal career, this was all new to me and I would do my best. So asked attorneys to teach me. So one of the things that we're up against is a little bit of the time clock. And so what I want to say is I will admit now that at the start we thought, do we have enough content to cover? I believe, yes, we had enough content to cover. And that's because of our two unbelievably skilled facilitators, but it's also true to all the participants asking great questions. What I'll do with the chat is I'll anonymize the great tips that you put in the chat, and then I'll collect that and just put it on the Berkeley Judicial Institute website. So grateful to Judge Kevin Burke in particular for starting us with that great question on kindness. So grateful to all of you for spending this time. Not as an aside, let's all take good care of ourselves this year. We've always needed it, but it feels like we couldn't have more signs this year than we need to take better care of ourselves and be better to ourselves. Judge Fogel, anything more for the good of the order before we
other than to echo everything you just said, and to encourage people to be kind to yourselves and to stay safe. I think those are my two wishes, and to thank you for being with us.